The chandeliers of the grand ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum of Art did not so much illuminate the room as they dripped light, a thick, honeyed gold that clung to silk gowns and the polished surfaces of champagne flutes. It was a light that revealed everything and nothing, catching the flash of a diamond, but obscuring the calculation in an eye. This was the annual Metropolitan Foundation Gala, an event where philanthropy was both a genuine passion and a brutal competitive sport. Fortunes were pledged, and reputations were bled dry, often before the first course was served. Ava Mitchell moved through the throng with a practiced, serene grace that belied the coiled tension in her shoulders. She was an island of quiet composure in a sea of performative exuberance. Her gown, a simple column of deep sapphire silk, was an act of deliberate understatement in a room screaming for attention. It absorbed the gilded light, rather than reflecting it, drawing the eye without demanding it. Tonight, she was the guest of honor, slated to receive the Foundation's prestigious Innovators Award for her work in sustainable technology and her generous funding of STEM education programs in underserved communities. She could feel the eyes on her. They were a physical weight, a collection of appraisals from the city's old guard and new money titans. They saw her, the CEO of Aura Innovations, a unicorn tech firm that had disrupted the energy sector. They saw her success, her youth, her gender, and of course, they saw her color. To some, she was an inspiration, a testament to a changing world. To others, she was a curiosity, an anomaly, and to a select, powerful few, she was an uncomfortable truth, a reminder that the walls of their exclusive world were more permeable than they liked. Her table was near the stage, a prime piece of real estate populated by her senior team and a few key board members. Sarah Jenkins, her chief legal officer and confidant for the better part of a decade, gave her a reassuring squeeze on the arm as she sat. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad." "Not accept an award," Sarah whispered, her voice a low counterpoint to the symphony of chatter. "In this room," Ava murmured back, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Is there a difference?" The evening progressed in a blur of polite conversation, air kisses that never landed, and speeches that artfully blended self-congratulation with charitable appeal. Ava navigated it all with the same focused calm she brought to a hostile negotiation. She discussed market trends with a hedge fund billionaire, debated the merits of carbon capture with a senator, and listened patiently as a society doyenne recounted a tedious anecdote about her last trip to Gstad. Finally, the moment arrived. The Foundation's chairman, a portly man named Arthur Vance, took the stage. His introduction was effusive, a highlight reel of Ava's accomplishments that made her sound less like a human being and more like a press release. He spoke of her meteoric rise, her innovative patents, her commitment to social good. The room responded with a wave of warm, genuine applause as Ava stood, smoothing the silk of her gown. A sense of quiet pride finally broke through her reserve. This mattered, not for the validation, but for the platform it gave her. The power to amplify the voices of those who were never invited into rooms like this. She took a step toward the stage, her acceptance speech a call to action for more equitable investment in education clear in her mind. But before her foot could touch the first step, another figure glided to the microphone. It was Genevieve Reed. A hush fell over the room, a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure. Genevieve was a force of nature in New York society, heir to the Reed industrial fortune. She ran her family's private equity firm with a ruthlessness that was legendary, all while maintaining the flawless veneer of a Park Avenue philanthropist. She was beautiful in a severe, architectural way. Her blonde hair pulled back into a chignon, so tight it seemed to pull the skin taut over her cheekbones. Her silver gown shimmered under the chandeliers, a perfect mirror for the room's cold, brilliant light. "Arthur, if you'll permit me," Genevieve said, her voice smooth as chilled vodka. "I'd like to offer a brief, unscheduled tribute to our honoree." Arthur Vance, caught off guard, could do little but nod awkwardly and retreat. Genevieve owned a significant portion of the city, both literally and figuratively. You did not say no to her. Ava froze, one hand resting on the back of her chair. She and Genevieve had a history, a complex tapestry of rivalry that stretched back to their college days. They were the sun and moon of their business school class, two brilliant women on a collision course. But their rivalry had always been one of professional one-upmanship, fought in boardrooms and on the stock market. This felt different. This was public. "I've known Ava Mitchell for a long time," Genevieve began, her smile a masterpiece of insincerity. She scanned the audience, her gaze lingering on the most influential faces. "And I've always been struck by her tenacity. It's so wonderful, isn't it, in this day and age, that companies like Aura are giving opportunities to people from her background. It's such a refreshing change of pace." The words were perfectly chosen, each one a tiny, poisoned dart. The pause before her background was just long enough to be meaningful. It wasn't an insult, it was an observation, delivered with the feigned sincerity of a compliment. But everyone in the room understood the subtext. It reduced Ava's life's work to a diversity initiative, her success to a box checked on a corporate responsibility form. Ava's face remained a placid mask, but inside, a cold fury began to build. She could feel Sarah's hand on her arm, a silent plea to remain calm. Genevieve continued, her voice gaining a theatrical warmth. "Ava has always had a unique talent for acquisition, a real gift for taking things and making them her own." She turned her gaze directly to Ava, her blue eyes glinting with something sharp and ancient. "Just as you were always so good at taking things that didn't belong to you, even back at Lakeview." The name hit Ava like a physical blow. Lakeview, a place she had not allowed herself to think about in 15 years. A place of shimmering water and dappled sunlight, and a memory so dark it was buried under layers of scar tissue. The room, the award, the 200 predatory smiles, they all faded away, replaced by the ghost of a boy's laughter and the sudden, terrifying silence that had followed. Her composure, the armor she had spent a lifetime forging, almost cracked. For a split second, the world tilted, the sound of the room replaced by the rushing of water in her ears. She gripped the back of her chair, her knuckles white. Genevieve saw it. The flicker of pain in Ava's eyes was the victory she had been aiming for. She delivered her final, devastating blow. Her success story is truly an inspiration to us all. It reminds us that with enough ambition, anyone can rise above their station. So let's give another round of applause for our unfortunate token, forgive me, our honoree Ava Mitchell. The applause that followed was scattered, uncertain. The coded language had been just subtle enough to provide plausible deniability, but the malice had been unmistakable. People clapped out of social obligation, their eyes darting between the two women on the stage. Sensing the declaration of a war they did not yet understand. Genevieve stepped back from the microphone, her work done. She had not just insulted Ava, she had publicly undermined her, framing her as an undeserving recipient, a fraudulent success built on handouts and theft. In a world where perception was reality, it was a mortal wound. Ava stood motionless for a beat, the silence in the room stretching into a tense, humming wire. Every person waited to see how she would react. Would she lash out? Would she break down? Would she retreat in humiliation? She did none of those things. With a deep, centering breath, she pushed the memory of Lakeview back into its locked box. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked to the stage. She did not look at Genevieve. She looked at the audience, her gaze sweeping over them, calm and commanding. She reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and waited for the last of the awkward applause to die down. The silence that followed was absolute. "Thank you, Genevieve," Ava said, her voice even and clear, betraying none of the turmoil raging within her. "For that fascinating perspective. I'll be sure to have my legal team analyze its potential market implications." She then turned her attention to the chairman. "And thank you, Arthur, and the Foundation, for this incredible honor." She did not give her prepared speech. Instead, she spoke from the heart, her voice resonating with a newfound power forged in the crucible of that public humiliation. She spoke not of her own success, but of the systemic barriers that people who looked like her faced every single day. She spoke of the insidious nature of coded language, of the way it sought to diminish and delegitimize. "Success," she said, her eyes finding Genevieve's in the crowd, "is not something that is given. It is not a token. It is earned. It is built, brick by painful brick. And I, for one, have no intention of letting anyone tear down what I have built." She held the award aloft. "So I accept this, not as a symbol of what I have done, but as a promise of what I am about to do." She walked off the stage to a thunderous, unified ovation. She had taken Genevieve's poison and transmuted it into power. But as she returned to her table, she knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. Genevieve had not just insulted her. She had exhumed a ghost. And for that, there would be a reckoning. The boardroom was a glass cage, suspended 50 floors above the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. The polished mahogany table was a dark mirror, reflecting distorted versions of the tense faces seated around it. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, less than 4 hours after Genevieve's public assassination attempt, and Ava had summoned her inner circle. The atmosphere was a universe away from the gilded opulence of the gala. Here, the air was cold, sterile, and sharp with the scent of impending conflict. Ava stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, her back to the room. The sapphire gown was gone, replaced by simple black slacks and a cashmere sweater. She watched the city lights blur into streaks as the rain intensified, each drop a tiny percussion against the glass. The city looked like a wounded galaxy, beautiful and broken. "Stock futures for Aura are down 3.5 points in after-hours trading," said Mark Chen, her CFO, his voice tight. He adjusted his glasses, staring at the tablet in front of him as if it had personally betrayed him. "The financial blogs are already running with it." Questions swirl around Aura CEO after Rival's cryptic speech. They're using words like instability and uncertainty. "It's more than a speech. It was a targeted strike," Sarah Jenkins countered, her legal mind already dissecting the attack into its component parts. The phrasing was masterful, nothing explicitly defamatory, but the insinuation of fraud is clear. She was planting a seed of doubt, and she chose the most fertile ground possible to do it. "Unfortunate token," muttered David Grant, Ava's head of communications, shaking his head in disgust. She knew every major journalist and investor in the city was in that room. "She wasn't talking to you, Ava. She was talking to them." Ava remained silent, her gaze fixed on the storm outside. They were analyzing the strategic implications, the financial fallout, the public relations crisis. They were right to do so. It was their job. But they couldn't see the true depth of the wound. They didn't know the name that was echoing in her soul. Lakeview. The word was a key. unlocking a room in her memory she had sealed shut 15 years ago. A room filled with the smell of pine needles and damp earth, the sound of crickets, and the unbearable image of a still, blue surface. Sarah's voice was gentle, cutting through the fog of the past. "What aren't you telling us?" Ava turned from the window, her expression unreadable. She mentioned a place. Lakeview. Sarah's brow furrowed. "I don't know it." "It was a summer retreat. For families from our boarding school. The summer before senior year," Ava explained, her voice low and measured. "The Reeds had a cabin there. My family was there on a scholarship program the school offered." She let the implications of that hang in the air. The scholarship kid, invited into the world of the wealthy. Another unfortunate token. Even then. She walked to the head of the table and sat, her hands folded calmly on the polished surface. There was an accident. Genevieve's younger brother, Leo. He drowned. The air in the room grew heavy. The abstract crisis of stock points and media spin suddenly coalesced into something visceral and tragic. "My God," Mark whispered. "Were you involved?" "I was there," Ava said, the words tasting like ash. "Leo and I were friends. We were out on the lake in a small motorboat. The engine stalled. A storm rolled in out of nowhere. The boat capsized. I tried to save him. I almost drowned myself." She could still feel it, the icy shock of the water, the burning in her lungs, the frantic, desperate search in the churning darkness. She had been found clinging to the overturned hull, half conscious. Leo was found the next day. The official investigation ruled it a tragic accident. She continued, her voice devoid of emotion. It was the only way she could speak of it. But Genevieve never accepted that. She wasn't there. But she created her own narrative. That I was reckless. That I had been showing off with the boat. That I had somehow caused the engine to fail. She told everyone I killed her brother. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a new rivalry. It was the continuation of a very old one, rooted in grief and misplaced blame. The gala wasn't a random attack. It was a calculated escalation of a 15-year-old vendetta. "She's not trying to hurt the company." "Ava," Sarah said, her voice filled with a dawning horror. "She's trying to destroy you. The company is just her weapon of choice." "She's using the same playbook," Ava said, a cold realization settling over her. "Back then, she spread rumors and lies to turn my classmates against me, to paint me as the irresponsible charity case who killed the golden boy. Now, she's spreading rumors and lies to turn my investors against me, to paint me as a fraudulent CEO who doesn't deserve her success." David Grant leaned forward, his mind racing. So this is her revenge. A 15-year slow burn. She's waited until you were at your most visible, your most celebrated, to try and take everything away from you. "Precisely," Ava confirmed. "But this time, I'm not a scared 17-year-old girl. And this isn't a high school rumor mill. This is my company, my life's work." A new kind of energy began to radiate from her, sharp and focused. The shock and the pain were being transmuted, forged into the cold, hard steel of resolve. Genevieve had made a critical error. She thought she was attacking a weakness, a source of guilt and shame. But in exhuming the past, she had given Ava something she hadn't realized she needed: clarity. The why behind the years of subtle sabotage and professional sniping was finally clear. "What's our move?" Mark asked, his focus shifting from damage control to counterattack. "We don't have one," Ava said. The team looked at her, stunned. "We have 3. She stood and began to pace, her movements precise, her energy filling the room. 1 David. You will draft a statement. No emotion. No defense. We express disappointment in the unprofessional nature of the comments and immediately pivot. We will announce the Aura Scholars Program first thing in the morning, a full-ride scholarship and mentorship initiative for 100 students from low-income backgrounds. We will use her attack to amplify our mission. We will not be defined by her narrative. We will write our own. David was already typing, a grim smile on his face. 2 Mark. I want a full financial analysis of Reed Equity Partners and every company in their portfolio. I want to know their vulnerabilities, their pressure points, their exposure. I want to know where every dollar is. Genevieve fights with insinuation. We will fight with data. Mark nodded, his eyes alight with the challenge. And 3, Ava said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal. Sarah, I want you to hire the best private investigator you can find. Someone discreet. Someone who can disappear. I don't want them digging into Genevieve's business dealings. I want them to go back to Lakeview. I want them to find every person who was there that summer. I want them to re-interview the first responders. I want them to find the original police report, the coroner's report, the maintenance logs for that boat. The official story was tragic accident. I want to know what was left out of that story. A heavy silence fell over the room. This was no longer just about protecting the company. This was about reclaiming the truth. Ava, Sarah said gently, are you sure you want to open that door? It's been 15 years. Ava met her friend's concerned gaze. She opened it. Sarah, I'm just going to walk through it and see what's on the other side. For 15 years, I've let her version of that story haunt me. I survived that day. But a part of me has always felt guilty, has always wondered if I could have done more. I've let that guilt fuel my ambition, my need to prove I was worthy of the life I got to live when Leo didn't. No more. She looked at her team, her most trusted allies, their faces illuminated by the glow of their screens in the pre-dawn darkness. This is no longer a PR crisis. This is a declaration of war. Genevieve Reed thinks she's haunting me with a ghost from my past. It's time to find out who's really been haunted. In the weeks that followed, the war was fought in the bloodless arenas of finance and public opinion. Genevieve's campaign was a masterclass in psychological warfare. She never mentioned Ava by name again in public. She didn't have to. She appeared on financial news networks, a vision of calm authority, discussing the inherent risks of investing in overhyped, personality-driven companies. One has to be cautious, she'd say, sipping her water, her gaze steady and direct to the camera. When a company's valuation is so tied to a single narrative, a single charismatic leader, what happens when that narrative proves to be unsubstantiated? It's a house of cards. The subtext was clear. Ava was a fraud, and Aura was her con. She seeded articles in influential publications, written by friendly journalists, questioning Aura's aggressive growth strategy. Anonymous sources, later traced back to shell corporations owned by Reed Equity, would express concerns about Aura's corporate governance. Each move was designed to erode confidence, to make investors and board members nervous. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Ava, in turn, refused to be drawn into a public feud. David Grant's communications team worked tirelessly, countering every negative story not with a denial, but with a new story of Aura's success. When an article questioned their Q3 projections, Aura announced a landmark deal to power a new data center for a social media giant entirely with renewable energy. When Genevieve hinted at instability, Ava was on the cover of Wired magazine, profiled as the visionary leading the green tech revolution. She was calm, focused, and relentlessly forward-looking. The Aura Scholars Program, announced the morning after the gala, was a resounding success, drowning out the whispers from the night before. Applications poured in by the thousands. Other tech companies, eager to align themselves with Ava, pledged their support. What Genevieve had intended as a tool of humiliation, Ava had transformed into a symbol of her core mission. But behind the scenes, the pressure was immense. Ava felt it in the late-night calls from anxious board members and the slight hesitation from a potential partner before signing a deal. Genevieve's poison was slow-acting, but it was working its way into the ecosystem. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the two women came face to face. It was at a sterile, power broker lunch spot in Midtown, a place so bland it was the perfect neutral ground for adversaries to meet. Ava was there with a potential investor. As she was leaving, she saw Genevieve holding court at a corner table, surrounded by men in bespoke suits. Their eyes met across the room. Genevieve excused herself and approached, a predatory grace in her stride. "Ava," she said, her smile as brittle as spun glass. "You're looking well, thriving, even. I do admire your resilience." "Hello, Genevieve," Ava replied, her voice placid. She would not give her the satisfaction of seeing any anger. That's a fascinating choice of words. One is usually resilient in the face of a tragedy or an attack. Genevieve's smile tightened infinitesimally. "I was simply referring to the pressures of the modern marketplace. It can be so unforgiving." The insult was perfectly veiled. She was the market. She was the pressure. "Indeed," Ava said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Some might find it difficult to maintain their balance when the ground is constantly shifting, but others find it an opportunity to build on more solid foundations." She gave a slight, dismissive nod. "If you'll excuse me, I have a company to run, one with actual innovations, not just inherited assets." She walked away, feeling Genevieve's eyes on her back. The brief exchange was a microcosm of their entire conflict, a battle of subtext, of veiled threats and intellectual sparring. But as Ava stepped out into the damp city air, the mask of control slipped. The encounter left a bitter taste in her mouth. She was winning the public war, but the private one, the one that lived in her memory, was taking its toll. The nightmares had returned. They were always the same. The dark, churning water of Lakeview, the weight of a hand slipping from her grasp, the terrifying, echoing silence where a voice used to be. She would wake up with her heart hammering against her ribs, the phantom chill of the lake clinging to her skin. The past was no longer a sealed room. It was a rising tide, and she feared it might drown her. Sarah Jenkins understood. She was the only one Ava allowed to see the cracks in her armor. One evening, she found Ava in the office long after everyone else had gone home, staring at a satellite image of Lakeview on her monitor. "Anything from the investigator?" Ava asked, not looking away from the screen. Sarah pulled up a chair. "He's methodical. His name is Ben Carter, ex-FBI. He's been in the town near the lake for 2 weeks, posing as a writer, working on a local history piece. He says people remember the drowning, but the story is thin. The reads were powerful. Even then, they controlled the narrative." "What about the boat?" Ava asked. It was the question that haunted her most. The engine had just died. No sputtering, no warning. One moment it was running. The next, it was silent. "Carter's trying to track down the marina owner who serviced it. Man named Old Man Hemlock. He retired and moved to Florida years ago. Carter's heading there next week." Sarah reported. She paused, then added gently, "Ava, Carter found something else. The original coroner's report. He had to file 3 separate information requests to get it unsealed. She slid a file across the desk. Leo had a significant amount of water in his lungs, consistent with drowning. But there was something else. A contusion on the back of his head. The coroner noted it was consistent with striking a submerged object, such as a rock or the boat's propeller shaft, during the capsizing. Ava read the line over and over. A head injury. No one had ever told her that. In the chaos of the rescue, in the fog of her own trauma and hypothermia, she had only remembered the storm, the wave, the boat overturning. Could Leo have been knocked unconscious? Is that why he had slipped away so quickly in the darkness? The thought was a fresh stab of guilt, a new angle of self-blame. "This doesn't change anything," she whispered, more to herself than to Sarah. "Maybe it does," Sarah countered. "It means it wasn't just about you not being strong enough to hold on." Ava, there were other factors. Factors you couldn't have controlled. But it wasn't a comfort. It was just another layer of tragedy. That night, Ava had the nightmare again. But this time, it was different. In the dream, as the boat overturned, she saw Leo's head strike the cold, hard metal of the engine casing. She woke with a strangled cry, the image seared into her mind. Genevieve's vendetta was no longer just a strategic threat. It was an act of profound cruelty, forcing Ava to relive the worst moment of her life, day after day. Genevieve wasn't just trying to take her future. She was poisoning her past. Ava realized then that this war couldn't be won with press releases and stock prices. The only way to win, the only way to silence the ghosts for good, was to find the one thing Genevieve had denied her for 15 years, the absolute, unassailable truth of what happened that day at Lakeview. The first formal declaration of Genevieve's endgame arrived not as a whisper, but as a blandly worded SEC filing. Reed Equity Partners, in conjunction with the Luxembourg-based investment firm, Valerius Capital, had acquired a 9.9% stake in Aura Innovations. The filing stated their intentions were, for now, passive. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. "It's a beachhead," Mark Chen stated grimly, pointing at the filing projected onto the boardroom's smart wall. "She's building a coalition of shareholders. Valerius is a predator. They specialize in hostile takeovers. This isn't a passive investment. It's the opening shot of a siege." Ava studied the names. She knew Valerius Capital. They were vultures who circled wounded companies, whispering promises of efficiency and maximized shareholder value while sharpening their knives to carve up the company for parts. Genevieve had found the perfect ally, a firm with no morals and deep pockets. Over the next month, Genevieve weaponized her new position as a major shareholder. She issued public letters to the board, demanding a strategic review. She used her media contacts to give interviews expressing deep concern over Aura's reckless spending on R&D and philanthropic initiatives like the Aura Scholars Program. "A public company has a fiduciary duty to its shareholders," she'd say. "The picture of fiscal responsibility. It is not a personal slush fund for its CEO's pet projects." She was framing Ava as an irresponsible idealist, a poor steward of investor capital. It was a brilliant strategy, preying on the market's inherent greed and short-term thinking. Several large institutional investors, who had once praised Ava's vision, began to waver. Their loyalty extended only as far as the next quarterly report. Ava felt as though she were fighting a war on two fronts. Publicly, she had to remain the calm, visionary leader, projecting absolute confidence. Privately, she was consumed by the investigation into Lakeview. Ben Carter, the investigator, was proving to be worth every penny. He had found Old Man Hemlock living in a sleepy retirement community in Sarasota. At first, The old mechanic had been reluctant to talk, his memory foggy about events from so long ago. But Carter was patient. He visited 3 times, bringing coffee and listening to the old man's stories about his fishing days. On the 3rd visit, Hemlock finally opened up. The memory came back to him, clear and sharp. "The Reed boat," he'd said, his voice a gravelly whisper over the secure line to Sarah's office. "Yeah, I remember it. A classic wooden runabout. Beautiful thing. But that engine, it was a temperamental beast." Sarah put the call on speakerphone for Ava. "What was wrong with it, Mr. Hemlock?" "It had a faulty fuel pump," Hemlock stated flatly. "I told Mr. Reed about it. Robert Reed, the father. Told him it was a dangerous flaw. The pump could cut out without warning, especially if the water got choppy. Kill the engine dead. I told him I needed to order a new part from the manufacturer, that the boat shouldn't be used until it was replaced. He didn't want to wait. Said his kids were only there for 2 weeks, and he wouldn't have them stuck on shore. He told me to just patch it up. Make it run." Ava and Sarah looked at each other, the air crackling with the weight of the revelation. "And did you?" Mr. Hemlock Sarah asked. "I did what he paid me to do," the old man said, a note of ancient shame in his voice. "I told him. I wrote it on the invoice, that it was a temporary fix and not guaranteed. I made him sign off on it, acknowledging the risk. I still have the paperwork, packed away in a box somewhere in my garage. A whole lifetime of paperwork. A faulty fuel pump, an engine that could die without warning, a father who knew the risk and chose to ignore it, a signed invoice. It was the key, the truth. It wasn't Ava's recklessness. It wasn't a freak accident. It was negligence. Robert Reed's negligence. The knowledge was a double-edged sword. It was exoneration, a lifting of a burden of guilt she had carried for half her life. But it was also a devastating secret. Genevieve's entire vendetta, her all-consuming grief and rage, was built on a lie her own father had constructed to protect himself. To reveal the truth would not just defeat Genevieve, it would shatter the very foundation of her identity and her family's legacy. Before Ava could fully process the implications, Genevieve made her final move. She formally launched a hostile takeover bid, offering to buy all outstanding shares of Aura Innovations at a 20% premium over the current market price. Simultaneously, she used her 9.9% stake to force an emergency shareholder meeting. The agenda was simple, a vote of no confidence in Ava Mitchell as CEO. The stage was set for the final confrontation. It would not be fought in the media or across a lunch table. It would be a formal, public tribunal, broadcast live to the entire financial world. Genevieve had engineered a scenario where Ava would be forced to defend her entire career, her entire life's work, while Genevieve herself sat as judge, jury, and executioner. The night before the meeting, Ava sat alone in her apartment, the city a-glittering, indifferent tapestry below. In front of her lay 2 documents. One was her prepared defense for the shareholder meeting, a meticulously crafted presentation of Aura's stellar performance, its innovative pipeline, and its long-term vision. The other was a scanned copy of a faded, grease-stained work order from Hemlock's Marina, dated 15 years ago. On it, in Robert Reed's arrogant, sloping signature, was the acknowledgement of a known, dangerous flaw. She had the power to not only save her company, but to utterly destroy her enemy. She could expose Genevieve's crusade as a lie, and her sainted father as the man truly responsible for his own son's death. It would be total victory, annihilation. But as she looked at the signature, she thought of Leo, the laughing, vibrant boy who had loved astronomy and bad jokes. What would he want? What did justice for him truly look like? She knew then that winning was not enough. How she won would define everything. She had to save her company. But she would not do it by becoming the monster Genevieve had always believed her to be. She would fight with the truth. But she would wield it not as a cudgel for revenge, but as a scalpel for justice. The emergency shareholder meeting was held in a cavernous conference hall in the financial district, a sterile cathedral of glass and steel. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a silent, high-stakes duel witnessed by hundreds of investors, analysts, and journalists. The proceedings were being live-streamed on every major financial news network. On one side of the stage sat Ava and her board, a united front of grim-faced determination. On the other sat Genevieve and the stone-faced executives from Valerius Capital, radiating an aura of predatory confidence. Outside, a storm, which had been threatening all day, finally broke. Rain lashed against the towering glass walls, and distant thunder rumbled like the sound of approaching artillery. The dramatic weather felt like a pathetic fallacy, a cheap cinematic trick. Yet it perfectly mirrored the turbulence inside the room. Genevieve spoke first. She was magnificent, dressed in a severe charcoal gray suit. She commanded the stage, her presentation a symphony of corporate assassination. She walked the shareholders through a series of sleek, damning charts and graphs. Each one was a carefully manipulated distortion, a twisting of data designed to paint a picture of incompetence and decline. She portrayed Aura's investments in R&D as vanity projects. The Aura Scholars Program was evidence of a CEO distracted from her core financial duties. She highlighted a minor, temporary dip in European market share and presented it as a catastrophic failure of leadership. She spoke with a calm, regretful authority. As if ousting Ava was a painful but necessary duty, she was performing for the good of all shareholders. Then she made it personal. Leadership requires more than just vision, Genevieve said, her voice laced with false sympathy. It requires stability, judgment. And I am afraid that Ms. Mitchell's leadership has been marked by a certain recklessness, a pattern of behavior that goes back many years. She didn't say the word Lakeview. She didn't have to. She let the insinuation hang in the air, a poisonous cloud that drifted back 15 years, just as she had at the gala. She was connecting the dots for her audience. The irresponsible girl who caused a death was now the irresponsible CEO sinking a company. When she finished, there was a tense, uncertain silence. Her case, built on lies and innuendo, was nevertheless persuasive. She had sown just enough doubt. The fate of Aura Innovations hung by a thread. Then it was Ava's turn. She walked to the podium, not with the fiery energy of a counterattack, but with a profound, almost sorrowful calm. The flickering of an overhead light, struggling against a power surge from the storm, cast intermittent shadows across her face. She did not begin with charts or graphs. She began with a story. 15 years ago, she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. A boy I knew died. His name was Leo Reed. He was my friend, and for 15 years, I have carried the weight of his death. A shocked murmur went through the audience. Genevieve stiffened, her face a mask of cold fury. This was not part of her script. For 15 years, Ava continued, her eyes fixed on Genevieve. I have been haunted by the narrative that I was responsible. A narrative created and perpetuated by a grieving sister who needed someone to blame. She, then, with surgical precision, dismantled Genevieve's business case. She put up her own slides, showing the true, unmanipulated data. She demonstrated how R&D spending was directly linked to their most profitable patents. She showed testimonials from Aura scholars, who were now interning at NASA and MIT. She explained that the dip in European markets had already been corrected, and was, in fact, outperformed by a 40% growth in Asia. She took every one of Genevieve's lies and exposed it to the cold, hard light of fact. "The case Ms. Reed has presented against my leadership is a work of fiction," Ava stated, her voice gaining strength. "A fiction designed to serve a single purpose: to settle a personal vendetta that has festered for more than a decade." She was winning. The mood in the room was shifting. Shareholders were looking at Genevieve with new, skeptical eyes. But Ava knew it wasn't enough. To secure her victory, to end this for good, she had to address the ghost in the room. "The story of what happened at Lakeview is not a business matter," she said, her voice softening. "It is a tragedy. But since it has been used as a weapon to attack my integrity and this company, I am forced to bring the truth into this room." She clicked to her final slide. It was not a chart. It was a simple, high-resolution scan of the work order from Hemlock's Marina. The text was clear. The warning was unmistakable. And, at the bottom, Robert Reed's signature was a damning indictment. "Leo and I were in a boat that had a known, life-threatening defect. A faulty fuel pump that could, and did, fail in choppy water. A defect the boat's owner was warned about in writing, and which he chose to ignore." She did not name Robert Reed. She did not have to. Genevieve stared at the screen, her face draining of all color. The signature was as familiar to her as her own. In that instant, her entire world, the bedrock of her righteous anger, crumbled to dust. The brother she had spent 15 years avenging was not killed by the recklessness of a teenage girl, but by the arrogance of the father she idolized. The room was in stunned silence. Ava now held the weapon of total annihilation in her hands. She could name him. She could tell the world that the great Robert Reed had covered up his own negligence, allowing a 17-year-old girl to carry the blame for his son's death. She could destroy the Reed family legacy forever. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, and in that stark, momentary glare, Ava saw the utter devastation on Genevieve's face. She was no longer a corporate predator. She was just a woman whose entire life had been revealed as a lie. And in that moment, Ava made her choice. "There is no value in assigning blame for a 15-year-old tragedy in a shareholder meeting," she said, her voice gentle but firm. She clicked the screen back to the Aura Innovations logo. "The only thing that matters in this room today is the future of this company, a company built on truth, on innovation, and on a commitment to making the world better, not on personal vendettas or the ghosts of the past." She looked directly at the shareholders. "The choice before you is clear. You can vote for a future driven by bitterness and fiction, or you can vote for a future driven by progress and fact. I trust you will make the wise decision." She walked back to her seat. The mercy of her final act was more devastating than any accusation could have been. By refusing to deliver the killing blow, she had demonstrated a strength and a character that Genevieve, in all her power, could never possess. She hadn't just won the battle. She had won the war by fundamentally changing its terms. Justice, she had decided, was not the same thing as revenge. The vote was a formality, a landslide. The motion of no confidence was resoundingly defeated, and the hostile takeover bid collapsed within the hour as Valerius Capital, sensing a toxic situation, immediately withdrew their support. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Genevieve Reed did not speak again. She sat, frozen, through the remainder of the meeting. a porcelain statue hollowed out from the inside. When it was over, she walked out of the conference hall alone, without a word to her team or the swarm of reporters. Her public facade of invincible power shattered forever. The live stream had turned her personal tragedy and public humiliation into a global spectacle. By the next morning, she had resigned as CEO of Reed Equity Partners and vanished from public life. In the now quiet boardroom, Ava stood with Sarah, watching the storm recede, the sky slowly lightening in the east. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a strange, quiet peace. "You could have destroyed her," Sarah said softly, staring out at the rain-washed city. "You could have destroyed her entire family. Why didn't you name him?" "Because this was never about her father," Ava replied, her reflection a faint outline against the brightening skyline. "It was about Leo. Exposing her father wouldn't have brought Leo back. It would have just created more wreckage. My goal wasn't to win, Sarah. It was to end it. For both of us." She had freed herself not by defeating Genevieve, but by refusing to be defined by their conflict. She had chosen to build, not to demolish. The news cycle was merciless. Reed Equity's stock plummeted. The story of the work order, though Ava had not explicitly detailed it, was pieced together by investigative journalists. The legacy of Robert Reed was permanently tarnished. Genevieve's public disgrace was absolute, but Ava took no joy in it. She saw only the tragic waste of a life consumed by a misguided quest for revenge. A week later, a plain white envelope arrived at Ava's office. It had been delivered by a courier, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a cashier's check made out to Ava Mitchell for $50 million. There was no note, no explanation, just the check. A desperate, transactional attempt to buy her silence. To ensure the full story of Robert Reed's negligence remained a private wound rather than a public conviction. It was the only language Genevieve had left. Ava looked at the check for a long time. It was a fortune, a silent admission of guilt, an offer of blood money. She could have used it to fund a dozen new initiatives at Aura, but it felt tainted. A final, hollow gesture from a broken adversary. She didn't cash it. Instead, she picked up her phone and called Sarah. "I need you to draw up the charter for a new nonprofit foundation." A few weeks later, Ava stood on the shores of a quiet, picturesque lake in upstate New York. It was a crisp autumn day, the air clean and sharp, the trees a riot of red and gold. The water was calm, a perfect, placid blue, reflecting the clear sky above. It was Lakeview. She was not alone. A small crowd of journalists and local community leaders had gathered. The place held no more terror for her. The nightmares had stopped. By facing the truth, she had robbed the memory of its power. It was just a lake now, a place of beauty and profound sadness. She stepped up to a small, temporary podium. 15 years ago, this place was the site of a terrible tragedy. She began, her voice steady. A young boy named Leo Reed lost his life in these waters. For too long, his memory has been associated with pain, with blame, and with a grief that curdled into bitterness. She paused, taking a deep breath of the cool, clean air. Today, we begin a new chapter for this place, and for his memory. She announced the official launch of the Leo Reed Water Safety Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free swimming lessons, CPR training, and water safety education to underprivileged children throughout the state. The foundation's seed funding, she announced, comes from a recent, unsolicited, and anonymous donation of $50 million. She held up the unsigned cashier's check for the cameras to see. Before handing it to the foundation's new director, she had sent the blank foundation charter back to Genevieve, who had clearly understood. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a transmutation. We are turning a symbol of private grief into a source of public good. We are ensuring that Leo's legacy is not one of loss, but one of life. She was not destroying her enemy's legacy. She was redefining it. She was using her power not just to win, but to heal, to reclaim the place of her deepest trauma and transform it into a source of hope. It was the ultimate act of empowerment. A final, quiet demonstration that she had not only survived her past, but had now become its master. As the press conference ended and the crowd dispersed, Ava walked alone to the water's edge. The sun was low in the sky, casting a long golden path across the surface. She thought of Leo, the brilliant, funny boy lost to the silent depths. She thought of Genevieve, a prisoner in a gilded cage of her own making. And she thought of herself, the 17-year-old girl who had fought for her life in this very water, and the woman she had become. She had not only built an empire, she had rebuilt herself. The war was over. The ghosts were at peace. And for the first time in a long, long time, so was she.